Hey everyone, good afternoon and welcome to Lead Your Movement. I'm Angelique Rewer, CEO and founder of The Corporate Agent, and this is our weekly live show where we bring on experts and entrepreneurs and business leaders who are using their platforms in order to drive positive change in the world. And today we are talking about building that platform and leveraging that platform. We're going to be talking all about podcasts and especially how large organizations are using podcasts right now in order to make the changes in the world and communicate with the key stakeholders that they need to communicate to. I think this is probably one of the biggest sort of underreported and under talked about areas of podcasting. But for those of you who are looking to partner with, collaborate with large organizations, this is something you really need to know about. And I hope also today that you're going to walk away with some really great advice and some insights to help you with your own podcast and building your own platform, and even some transferable ideas and concepts, whether you use a live cast like what we use on Wednesdays, or you have another platform. But really, these days, it is all about having the microphone, so to speak, with your ideal audiences and your ideal key stakeholders. So we're really excited about who we have on today and this topic. Before I introduce our guest today, let me just share with you a couple of quick but important housekeeping announcements. The first is that next Wednesday is our final episode before our summer hiatus, and we will be joined by Jose Hernandez, a NASA astronaut who applied to the astronaut program not once, not twice, not three times, not 11 times, but 12 times. And on his 12th time was accepted to the NASA astronaut program, and who did travel into space on an important mission. And he will be sharing with us those leadership lessons as well as how he has transferred those skills and that knowledge and that perseverance into his brand new endeavor, which I know you all are going to be interested in learning about. It is one of the most inspirational people I think I have ever met in the last decade plus. You should bring the tissues for that conversation. It is quite emotional when he shares some of his stories about how he went from working in fields picking grapes as a child and going back and forth between the United States and Mexico, and not being steady in school and working in the fields and having migrant parents and going on to become a NASA astronaut. It's absolutely an incredible story. I cannot wait to share it with you all. The other two announcements I want to share with you, one is that our registration is open for our Real Deal conference that's happening October 4, 5, and 6 in Fort Lauderdale, right on the beach. A beautiful resort, literally oceanside, 3 days. This is an in-person event. I know, shocking, right? We're having an in-person event, but this is solely an in-person event. This is not a hybrid event. This is not a recorded event. This is a live, like physically in person all together in Fort Lauderdale for 3 amazing days. And right now at realdealevent.com, you can grab your registration for an insanely low investment. We know that it's been, a challenging last 15, 16, 17 months for everyone. So we wanted to make these tickets very accessible to all of you. But the registration price is going up on June 1st. So that's just a few days away now. So May 31st is the last opportunity to get the priority access registration pricing. So head to therealdealevent.com. Hundreds of people are already registered for this event. We cannot be more excited. And last but not least, over the summer, we are going to be doing a lot more clubhouses. So if you're not connected to me on Clubhouse, I highly encourage you to do that, because that is really where, especially with my travels this summer, the easiest way for me to connect with all of you and continue the incredible discussions that we have around here at the Corporate Agent is on Clubhouse. So connect with me there, and you will get an alert as we get going with all of that. All right. Today's topic, podcasting. It is all the rage. Every single time we turn around, another celebrity who they already have a lot of visibility, they already have a lot of influence out there, and yet they too are turning to podcasting. You have President Obama, former President Bill Clinton, Paris Hilton, Rob Lowe, Jason Bateman, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Oprah, Kate Hudson, Snoop Dogg, Gwyneth Paltrow, Lena Dunham. All of these people have podcasts. Why? Because it gives them direct line of communication to the audiences, to the stakeholders that they care about. We want to help you do that. We want to help you understand how organizations, big organizations, are doing that for themselves. And so to have this conversation, I brought in the leading expert on corporate podcasting, who is Vernon Ross. He is an author, a speaker, and a podcast producer and strategist with a focus on corporate podcasting and training. His areas of expertise are podcasting, content strategy, sales training, and branding. Vernon keynotes in person and virtually at industry events as a session leader and as a keynoter on the subjects of podcasting, storytelling, and professional development. He is the guy that major brands in the Fortune 100, the Fortune 500 are turning to. Brands like Aflac, brands like Bayer, brands like Paychex are bringing in to help them understand how to harness the power of podcasting. And we want to help you do that as well. So let's welcome to Lead Your Movement, the one, the only Vernon Ross. Welcome.
Hey, Angelique, what's going on?
Man, we have a big conversation today. I mean, I
Right.
feel like, don't you feel like 2020 and into 2021 was like the year that podcasting just exploded?
It literally did. I thought it was going to be slow, but no, I did not get that. It was busier than ever. It was slow at first. That first couple months where nobody knew what was going on and companies kind of backed off. But after about 4 months, everyone was like, oh, wait, our people are at home. We have no way to connect with them. We need to start rebuilding these personal relationships, particularly with management, to our employees. And how can we do that? Yeah.
Amazing. So speaking of that, and kind of with that context, when you think about all the different things you're doing, how would you put that under one umbrella and say, this is Angelique, the movement that I am leading out there?
The movement I think I'm leading is helping companies to reconnect with their employees in a more intimate way. Podcasting is one of the best ways to tell story. Audio is one of the best ways to tell story because it goes back to what people grew up with. You grew up listening to the radio, or you grew up listening to audio, whether you're, a millennial and you're listening to Spotify all the time, or you're my age and you grew up listening to radio. Things that happen in your ear, you remember, you retain that stuff. And I'm trying to lead the movement of helping companies reconnect with their employees no matter where they are, because everyone is so apart nowadays and they're starting to come back together. But I think the dynamic has changed and a lot of people are not going to be in the office as much anymore. So you got to have a way to connect with those people on a more intimate level. And I think podcasting is the way to do it.
Good stuff. So you were one of our fan favorites, to say the least, when last summer, so it's almost been not quite a year, but last
That is
summer we did
crazy.
a 14-day Lead Your Movement challenge where we
Yeah,
got
that
you
was
all
so
sorts of
much fun.
books. You were amazing. And Cassandra, thank you for pointing out. Yeah, Vernon was one of our most favorite, most talked about experts on that. She said it was so great on your virtual event and can't wait to hear what you have to say. I just want to give a shout out to and
Nice.
a welcome to Dee and Pat and Tammy. But yeah, I mean, Vernon, I think we had a conversation, last summer about this. What's the status now? Like, where are things now
Mhm.
when it comes to how organizations are using podcasting to connect?
Yeah, yeah. The way that people are using it now, particularly organizations, they're now using it more for sales training, onboarding, and like just-in-time education. I've had a lot of like learning management, or LMS is learning management systems that companies use to educate their employees. I've had a lot of those people, those trainers, come into me saying, how can we incorporate more training for our salespeople? Because now that they're virtual, they can't go to these things, and they don't want to necessarily sit down in front of their computer all day after Zoom meetings and all these calls. How can we get them to learn and do it in a way where they can consume it easily? And so podcasting has just been that's been the direction that companies are going, particularly with onboarding and sales training.
Wow.
A lot of employee engagement from a executive level as well.
Amazing. Are any companies using podcasting nowadays to educate their customer bases,
Yeah.
either in B2C or B2B?
As a matter of fact, one of my clients, P&G, they have a an actual external podcast. It's called Powered with Purpose. And they're talking about different things within the P&G organization. And it's a public podcast really to create, I think, customer advocacy. And it's available to anyone. So I can talk about that one. And it's been great for them. I mean, they had this immediate upsurge in listeners because they put it out there. Of course, everyone in the company listened to it, but people are starting to discover it, and they're discovering more of the P&G story. So yeah, it's really exciting. Companies are using external podcasts basically to create brand awareness and customer advocacy. Another company that did that was Bayer, the climate brand of theirs, their farming brand. They
Wow.
created an external podcast to talk about farming and the different seasons and the challenges that farmers were running into in the fields back in 2019 with all of the flooding that was going on in the Midwest, and with planting season being extended because of that, and how it was going to impact harvest season, and all of the stuff with drone technology, and way more about farming than I ever thought I would know. But it was a really interesting podcast to work on.
It's funny because sometimes people come to us, consultants, coaches, trainers, keynote speakers, professional service providers, whoever it is. I mean, that's who our audience obviously is predominantly. And the folks will often say, well, I don't know corporate, or I don't know, what organizations do or what problems they have,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really interesting because I think podcasting is probably, I think, one of the more fun ways to actually
Yeah.
understand what companies do, because you can listen to these podcasts, and if they're done well, if they're produced well, it's really enjoyable to listen to these things and think, I bet you just blew people's minds right now, for people who don't even realize, because they never took the time to look at Bayer's corporate website, that they even have a farming side. And, I think,
Right.
right?
Right.
I think folks like forget to look beyond sometimes the consumer brands. But I thought, for me, like Poppy Harlow at CNN has a great podcast, and she's
She
always talking,
does.
right? It's one of the best out there. She's talking to
Yeah.
these corporate people. So I guess I just want to put a plug in that, finding some of these corporate podcasts and jumping around and learning these different things. I mean, I just think it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
best ways to really understand what's happening in the business world right now.
Yeah, one of the things that another client is doing is they're bringing in all of these large names, like Malcolm Gladwell and folks like that,
Mm,
into their internal podcasts to talk about their opinions on how they see their companies from the outside looking in, and giving their
wow.
expert opinions in relation to whatever their work is. So they may bring in a Ryan Levesque and talk about, his whole Ask formula stuff within their organizations and how it relates to that. And then they're taking that content and they're pushing it out for podcasts for the people that can't attend that meeting, or they're
Mm,
just recording it as an interview. And that gets people engaged because I've heard about who Ryan Levesque is, and maybe I wanted to listen to him, but not necessarily on a podcast. It's not about the thing that I'm doing. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that you can do with it. As creative as you can get, you can do it with podcasts.
I absolutely love that. Out of service to our community at large, I've got to ask you this question. In
Sure.
addition to the learning management people, the learning and development, the organizational development people, what are some of
Hmm.
the other departments inside of large organizations that might be looking for an expert to be interviewed on an internal podcast? Because we believe, as you know, at the corporate agent, in a philosophy of you go first, meaning you invest
Right.
into a relationship first with an organization. Don't always be having your hand out for, pay me, pay me,
Yeah.
pay me. Invest into that relationship. I think podcasts are one of the best ways to offer value to an organization to start the relationship. What are some of the
Hmm.
departments that you're seeing really get involved in internal podcasting?
One of the ones that will surprise you is accounting.
Yeah,
So
I'm shocked. I'm shocked. You win. You
yeah,
win.
yeah, accounting. So there are associations for accountants, and they have conferences and conventions, and all of that stuff disappeared in 2020. So now they're bringing in experts in the accounting field that they would normally attend some of these things to come into these organizations and talk to their people, but not necessarily bring them in the organization. Sometimes they're doing a Zoom call, but if I can, I'll get them to do audio so that they can push it out. And it's in a podcast series format where they break down the conversation into 2, 3, or maybe 4 conversations, and they cover the stuff that they would normally go to a conference that would be sort of a boondoggle, but they would get, the accounting type of stuff information in. But now it's done in a more efficient way and in a way that is a little surprising to organizations that, hey, maybe we want to do this. We saw the communications department had a podcast. Can we bring in some experts in accounting to talk about some of the things that are exciting to us in this area? So yeah, if you can think of a department within a company, they're doing it. Of course, sales is doing it. They're all over it. Marketing departments are all over it. And the ones that are having, I think, the biggest impact are leadership, because leadership is able to humanize themselves a little bit, particularly the C-suite. The mid-level managers, they're pretty involved with their teams. Their teams know who they are. But in a lot of these really, really large companies, the C-suite is virtually unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Their employees see them on the news, if they're on the news talking about something, or they'll, the all hands meeting, and they're like, yeah, I guess that's the CEO. But when the CEO can get on and tell a personal story and connect it to, the impact that the company is having on something, or share something that they normally wouldn't be able to share with their people, it has a lot more impact and helps bring those organizations closer together.
You just hit on something that I had no idea you actually do win the prize for shocking me, because a lot doesn't shock me when it comes to corporate. I did not know that the accounting group, but I mean, it makes sense to me. I think a lot of folks who haven't worked in corporate, or haven't been there
Hmm.
in a while, or depending on what their function was, really don't understand the gap between most employees and the senior leadership. I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
My very first corporate job, I worked my office was maybe 40 feet from the CEO's office, right? So I
Hmm.
was on a first name basis for him. In fact, I was his special projects person. And here I am, 20 some years old. So to me, he was just, let's call him Joe. It's not his name, but let's just call him Joe. So
Right.
so I'm just like on this first name basis because I was on the C suite floor with all the senior executives. So they were my life
Hmm.
day in and day out. And I'll never forget, I got on an elevator one time in that big corporate building, and I was heading down to the lobby to pick something up. And I was a bit, uh, you know, I was stressed because something was going on and I was all over the place and I was dropping papers. And I said to the person, Joe so and so is going to kill me if we don't get this person upstairs. And the person in the elevator looked at me. They got on maybe two floors below the top floor that I worked on. And they said, "Who is Joe?" Now, he was our CEO of the company, and here they were two floors away. And they didn't know, right? They didn't know who the CEO was. Except their
Yeah.
name wasn't Joe. Their name was very strange. It was a very, very odd name. There's no one else in the world with this name. So it was like, how do you not know? It's like an Elon Musk. There's only one Elon, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so I think what you're pointing out here is just the role that podcasting can play, Vernon, in uh, closing a gap
Yeah.
that otherwise is difficult for a company to close.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it closes the communications gap, and it helps to bring people closer together, because once you share a story with someone, you feel like you know that person better. So a lot of us had the experience of, you've gone to a conference and you may have gone to a happy hour, or you meet someone at a booth and you share some personal story that you connect with, and now you're fast friends and you're hanging out with this person the entire conference, and you end up developing a friendship. A podcast is very much the same way. If you can connect on a personal level to something that the person says, and it doesn't have to be some tragic story of something they lost or anything else like that. It can just be something that's identifiable and relatable, to help you feel like this person is, oh, okay, this is a human being that I could actually have a conversation with, get to know, and they're not just the person who's barking down the orders and everything's rolling downhill from them, and all of the stuff that I don't like to do is because of this person. Now it's, oh, wait a minute, this person is actually kind of cool or human, and oh, they have kids, they have a family, they're a real person. So I think that's one of the advantages that podcast has. It's not video. It doesn't have to be super polished. They're not always on. They
Right.
share more on podcasts because it's a more intimate just in and of itself. So it's great for doing that and helping people, particularly on the C level and the executive level, connect.
You know, I
Especially the ones that like to send out like newsletters and emails, because
Yes.
they'll send out these newsletters and emails and think that it's connected, and it's not. And they're like, oh, that was a great email. And it's like, yeah, okay.
That well, and
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry. I was kind of rambling
no,
on.
you took the words out of my mouth as someone who came out of corporate communications, right? As someone who came out of corporate communications, when you start putting words into an email communique to 10,000, 50,000, 150,000, or half a million employees, as was the case at one of my organizations, every word is scrutinized and it loses any
Yeah.
personality. It runs through legal, it runs through all of these different groups, HR and everyone else. By the time you put out a communique, it has been just like death by committee. It is as sterile, it is full of gobbledygook, legal
Exactly.
speak.
Yep.
It's watered down. The same CEO I'm talking about, one of my favorite memories of him, he had a huge holiday party at his mansion. And I was in my early 20s. So this was all like very like, oh my gosh. And we were at his party. The caterers were everywhere. I mean, I'm talking valet. Like it reminded me of like Secret to My Success with the mansion and so
Oh my
we're
God.
so we're at his house and big holiday party. And my husband, he worked at Arthur Anderson at the time, but we're in our early 20s and it's a very like
Hmm.
snooty, right? And the CEO had snuck off to the kitchen, this huge kitchen. He had snuck off to the kitchen because he had a TV in the kitchen and Kentucky was playing the men's basketball team. And my husband snuck in there to get a beer. And the next thing you know, my husband and I are sitting at his kitchen table. There's like, 500 people at this corporate party, and we're sitting with the CEO watching this basketball game.
Right, right.
And, it
Just a
was like,
guy.
that's like the kind of, I think,
Yeah.
side of executives that people don't get to see. And honestly, would help. I think everybody always talks about all this complicated stuff to create engagement inside of companies, but I feel like a podcast has to be a part of that story now so that
Yeah.
the employees can connect on a human to human basis with the leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is great for that. And for, people that are listening, it's not just about, so now I have to do this personal connection thing. It's not just that, but it does really enhance that. And it's an aspect that you just can't get through any other medium other than podcasting because it's so intimate and the person has a tendency to relax. So that's the other thing about podcasting. It gets you to relax. It gets you to that, oh, this is the real person. Just like you're saying, you walk into the kitchen, here he is sneaking off to watch the football game
Yeah,
or
because
basketball.
he didn't wanna have to rub elbows either. He's a real guy who, like, doesn't wanna have to do that.
Exactly.
He's like, "Look, I wanna
Right.
my team is playing tonight. I wanna watch my team." So, it just creates those moments. Let's talk about storytelling for a minute because
Yes.
I know this is there are I think the little anecdotes and the little stories, it's always what people remember most, even in a keynote. Um, Talk to us, especially because a lot of people who are out there, consultants and coaches and professional speakers, et cetera, have podcasts. What is the role of storytelling in all of this? And what are some tips and strategies you have for folks around storytelling?
Yeah, often when companies start these podcasts, well, number one, they have no idea of what to do. They think, oh, okay, I've heard a podcast. I listen to Joe Rogan. I listen to this person. So I'll sit down. I'll ask a bunch of questions. They'll answer them, and it'll be great. And usually it's not. Uh, and most of the time, it's because you just haven't built any story arc into it. And
Mm,
so one of the things I go over with companies, and particularly anyone that's telling story, Pixar has these 21, 22 rules of storytelling. And of course, everyone knows that Pixar is one of the best storytelling
oh,
brands in the world.
amazing.
But their fourth rule is pretty much almost all you need for a podcast. And like I forget when it was, I think it was 2012, one of the Pixar employees, that she's no longer there, tweeted out their rules of podcasting, and she tweeted out the fourth rule of podcasting. And it's basically, or not podcasting, of storytelling. And it's once upon a time there was, and then there's, underscore, and every day, then one day, because of that, until finally, and then the last one is ever since then. So when you're going through and you're actually talking about a story, if you use that, that spine, basically the story spine of once upon a time, there was this guy named Vernon, and every day he would go to this coffee shop and get coffee. But one day the coffee shop was closed. And because of that, he ended up visiting a bakery that was right down the street. And because of that, he realized that they actually had better coffee. And because of that, he started going there every day until finally he invested in the company and decided to become a part owner in the company. And ever since then, he's been running this coffee and bake shop. And so that's how you go through and tell a story. So you relate that to, what you're doing in your company, and you use that, kind of once upon a time theme, so that you understand what you're doing and you're building a complete story while you're going through and doing that interview. It's not just question after question after question. It's a question with purpose, is how you tell a story on a podcast. So making sure that the first question has purpose to lead into the everyday, or what they're doing, or their mission, or the thing that they're working towards, or the goal that you have for the thing that you did, or what's newest in your company right now in the company news. That's the once upon a time. And
Mm,
then the everyday. But then one day, what happened? What was the conflict, or what was the key turning point of the arc of that story? Is like, where does it get really, really exciting? So maybe it's fundraising, and you're, a charitable organization, and on giving day you were able to do these things that led you to that. And then you go into your, until finally, as you're winding down, and then ever since then, the kind of end of the story that leads them into maybe the next podcast episode that you're going to be doing, if you're doing a series, or the next thing that you're going to be doing, or the next initiative that you're going to be implementing. So it's really building up on each piece. But so often companies just want to, oh, we just want to randomly ask this person questions, and we think that it's going to be great. And it's like, no, you got to plan this out. You got to script it out. You got to have basically a story treatment like you do in a movie.
mm.
That's the key element to good storytelling on podcast, is not necessarily scripting out all your questions, because podcasters get into that too, particularly the ones that are, oh, I'm a podcaster, I can help your company, tell stories. Well, it's not just writing down questions and then getting those questions approved. It's, let's make questions that have purpose to drive the person through a story that's going to give them something at the end, because that's really what you want. It's like you're thinking about the listener, not necessarily the person that you're interviewing. And a lot of the times, particularly when you're talking about celebrities and podcasters, or even within companies, when they're bringing in leaders and experts and influencers into their companies to talk to their employees, they get wrapped up in who the person is that they're interviewing, and not really crafting that story for the listener, because that's who's really
Yes.
important. And that's the person that you're bringing in, the celebrity, they're just to get them to listen. So they're going to get the ears, but now you actually have to make that story interesting to capture the attention of the person, or they'll soon forget it.
That story arc that you laid out from Pixar is absolutely brilliant. In fact, somebody even one of our Facebook listeners, because Facebook unfortunately only shows us Facebook, is like, I love that. Absolutely love that. I know my whoever you are on Facebook, my ears totally perked up to that as well. It's so brilliant and can be used in so many formats.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. Was absolute gold, Vernon. My ear also perked up around this idea of really prepping the guest to be able to kind of go through that story, because I
Hmm.
think about one of the biggest issues that companies have is transfer of knowledge. So
Yes.
they end up with one department or one sales person, or
Hmm.
one person in the marketing group or the engineering group, or what have you, that really has kind of cracked the code on how
Yeah.
to do something, right? And then they really struggle to carbon copy that best
Hmm.
practice, right, across
Yeah.
to the different departments. That's the cross pollination of that. What a
Hmm.
great thing to do. What a great template for all of our consultants and coaches and trainers and speakers out there who have case studies. If they're going to be
Yeah.
interviewed on a
That's
podcast,
right. That's
you know,
right.
and let me just say, can I rant for one quick second?
Absolutely. I love
So
your rant.
here goes an Angelique rant. Okay. So, we bring on clients all the time and, have them talk about what they do. And we always say, if you want to tell a story, if you want to bring a story. And I don't think that there is one person that, despite us saying always in our pre communications, in our green room, everywhere we go, that comes and says, I have this story that I worked with this client, and I
Hmm.
think that story of what happened with this client would be so interesting. And I would love to I'm coming on your platform. Let me tell that story. So let me just say to all of you listening, when you get invited onto a podcast, you could take that frame, that Pixar frame that Vernon just laid out
Right.
for you, and you can give the questions in the right order to your host that's having you on and say, this is a story that's going to just really teach so much to your audience and take them on the journey. So I think, Vernon, the other side of it is, sometimes we can't count on the podcasters, the hosts, people. I will tell you, even though I don't
Absolutely.
use that exact framework, I will tell
Hmm.
you that the biggest names that we've had on this show have called me after and said, "Thank you for being such a great interviewer." That I really got to share some incredible things, because usually, just whenever you guys are going on a podcast or any platform and you're going to be interviewed, show up with a story that's going to let your business shine, that's going to let your results shine. Don't put it all on the host to figure out how to help you do that. Like, and
Exactly.
Vernon, you and I were talking about that. Like, we never miss an opportunity. Like, if we're on the show, if we're getting interviewed by the media, I feel like one of the things that you and I are two peas in a pod is we won't miss the opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get a lot of chances like that. You may not get another one, so you better take advantage of it.
Yeah, you have to, we do it in media, right? I was telling you in the
Yeah,
green room that we do
yeah,
that
yeah.
in media. That if I'm on with a reporter and they're trying to kind of maybe rush along to the next question, I'll stop them and say, "No, wait, what I'm about to share with you is really important to what you're writing about." If they say,
Hmm.
"What else do you want to say?" I give them anecdotes. You've got to really be in the driver's seat. What are some of the other things that when you're on the side of telling the story, if you
Hmm.
are the person who's telling the story, what are some of the tips that you think people should remember about being a good storyteller, not just a good story asker?
That's that is a good question. A good storyteller instead of a good story actor. So when you're telling the story, I think staying on topic. It is really easy to go off on a tangent on little parts of the story that's interesting, particularly if it's in a back and forth type of thing. A podcaster or interviewer may ask you a question in the middle of you trying to go into one thing, and then you end up going into another thing because you're just kind of going, and they're not interrupting. So making sure to stay on task when you're telling the story, and tell it in bite-size portions. Make sure to pause. If it's an interview and it's not video, make sure that if it's a good story, you're smiling, you have some emotion when you're telling it, because it will come across over the audio, whether or not it's just kind of something you're running through or whether it's something that's really important to you. So like I never will forget, I was telling you this in the green room. I was in this training, and it's one of the things that I learned of acknowledging when someone shares a story with you. So when you're telling the story, if there's an emotional part to the story, pausing just long enough. Silence is okay, so that people can understand what it was that you just said. So I was talking to a group in a training, talking to them about branding, and they were very resistant. There was artists in there, and it was a cohort. It was only like 8 people, but it was a great opportunity. And I'm talking to them, and they're going on, and this one woman shares a story about discrimination when she was a child, and she was Hispanic, and went to this predominantly white school, and the kids didn't like her, and then some of the stuff that they said to her and how it affected her, and the reason that she was doing what she was doing right now had to do with that, but no one had ever really gone into that with her. And so she was like, it was very emotional. Everybody in the room is kind of like tearing up. I went through this series of questions with her to pull that out, and then I just went on to the next thing. And so when you're telling the story, make sure that you pause long enough And if the person is sharing something with you and you're the one asking the story, thank them, because I didn't thank her for sharing that. I didn't acknowledge the fact that she did it. And that's one of the things. Acknowledge the portion of the story when you're telling it. Make sure that you give it enough time to actually sink in. So, if it's something emotional, stop for a second and then continue on with your story. And it has a lot more impact, particularly for the listener. And that's the thing that you have to keep in mind, is that you have a listener on the other end that's hearing you. They don't know what you're dealing with or what you're going through when you're telling the story, if it happens to be emotional. But if it's just something that they need to listen to, that they need to absorb, just pause long enough just for them to kind of pick it up. Because sometimes you need to soak things in. Silence, I know, on radio and podcasts, like, oh, no silence, I need sound the whole time. But a slight dramatic pause, it will do a lot for people that are actually telling the story. I know that was a long answer, but
No, it's a wonderful answer. There's so much in there. So one of the things that I just want to say about the pausing and the silence, I was actually a radio and television minor in college, and we studied radio,
mm-hmm.
and how it was used for shows, listening to the old shows on the radio. And actually, I feel like there some of that's that myth has gotten out there with like no silence. Honestly,
Right.
when you go back to the old radio shows, they would use silence very strategically, because
Yeah.
it creates an anticipation, because
Mm-hmm.
you don't know who's at the door. You hear like the creak of the door open or what have you, and there's silence. So you're like waiting
Yeah.
for so kind of going back and listening to some of those old shows and listening to the pauses. We have a couple of folks, I shouldn't say a lot, a couple of folks who are listening right now who are actually about to start their own podcast. And I think
Nice.
some of the, I want to put up, where did it go? Rubina, if we can put up, she said, hi, Angelique and Vernon. Rubina Cohen on Firefly Strategies Global. I'm getting ready to do my first interview for my brand new podcast. So that's who had written. I love that. So one, congratulations,
Yeah.
Rubina.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
I think you just gave some great tips, Vernon, within what you just shared on how to be a great host. One is really listening to what the host the guest is sharing, so you can acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank them when they're being vulnerable. Thank them because I do think it's a gift when people share not
Yeah.
just their expertise, but their stories. What are some of these other things? You've got about, at least a half a dozen people who've kind of written in, since I've been
Mm-hmm.
sitting here, who are all starting their own podcasts right now. And I know you work with influencers as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I want to be clear, everybody. Vernon doesn't only work with corporate on their podcast, he also works with smaller business owners and experts and influencers on
Yeah.
their podcast.
Absolutely.
What are some of the things that they should be thinking about as they get their podcasts off the ground?
Well, first thing, podcast hosting. Go with a good podcast host that's been around for a while. There are a lot of little podcast companies popping up because the industry is hot.
Mm.
But if they've been in business less than a year, or they're in their second round of seed funding, be careful, because
Okay.
I've seen this happen here recently,
Yep.
where thousands of people went to a company and the company went out of business. And
Wow.
they were like, how do we get our shows? I can't find all of this time that I put in.
Oh my
So
gosh. Oh my gosh.
yeah, choose a dependable host. There are a lot of them out there.
Now you're not talking about the host, just for everybody's clear, you're talking about the platform, like the actual technology
Yeah,
host.
the actual
Yeah.
technology
Yep.
for the platform. So when you're podcasting, you do need a podcast host to host those MP3 files. Don't upload them to your WordPress site. Um, GoDaddy, HostGator, all of them do not support podcasting. So you will like go over your server limits really quickly, just on the techie end of how podcasting works. And I don't want to go into it; it's just too much. But trust me, get a good podcast host. That's just the bare minimum basic thing that you do. Plan out your episodes. Come up with, your first 20, your first 50 episode titles, guest. I would say a minimum of 10. And I always start people with a minimum of 10. Who are going to be your first 10 interviews? What are going to be your first 10 topics? And if you can't come up with those, you really need to sit down and think about, is this the time to start the podcast? Coming up with content's easy. It just depends on how into your field you are and how you're planning it. Consider doing seasons versus just a continuous podcast so that you can
Mhm.
take a break
That's
because it gets
really
exhausting.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it
we're
gets really
taking a summer
exhausting.
hiatus. Yeah, we're taking a
Yeah.
summer hiatus. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to just to give yourself time to refresh and think about new stuff and new ideas that are coming out, and if you want to incorporate those into the show. Also, I tell people don't be afraid to make your show have a beginning and an end. If you maybe you only need to do 20 episodes, and this is the podcast, and then you just promote it and that's it. And then you go and you do another podcast, and maybe it's a different series. Podcasts can be limited. And one of the best examples I use is Serial. The first season of Serial was that was it. That was that story, and it was done.
Mhm.
So, but it's everyone still knows about it because it was such a good series. And then there was like a season two, but that very first season of Serial, people understand that, oh, wait, this is a limited thing. There's no issue with the limited series. It's a big thing that's been done in television for years. Don't be afraid to do it with your podcast because number one,
That's brilliant. That's
it's gonna
brilliant.
free you up. Yeah. So don't be afraid to do the limited series. There's so much stuff. Market more than you record. I will tell people that record a few episodes, but you got to market that podcast. Nobody knows about it or cares about your podcast, no matter who you have on.
Right.
So you got to market it. And above all, make it really, really easy for your guest, if you're having a guest based podcast, to share your episode. Plan the sharing, I guess is the
Yeah.
easiest thing I can say.
Yes.
Have links for them to be able to use. Do like Angelique, copy what she does on LinkedIn. She had a graphic ready for me. She had an email ready for me. She had links ready for me. I didn't have to think about a thing. Only thing I had to think about was the fact that I tanked one of my pages that I was going to send you guys to. And that was it. That was on me.
Great.
So
That's
yeah, I
great.
mean, you stuff like that, making it easy to share your show, even for you to do it. So get those tweets ready, get your Instagram posts ready, consistency with your brand, just because it's a branding thing. Make sure it's consistent across all your channels. You don't have to be everywhere, but be great on the places that you're on. So that's the one thing is people, oh, I got to be on all the platforms. Not really, but if you're going to be on these platforms, be great and be consistent on those platforms. So if you're going to do a weekly show, please be a weekly show. If you're going to do monthly, then just do monthly, but be consistent. So consistency, planning, research, and that's really, and promotion. That's the one of the four things that you got to just do when you're a podcaster. If you're talking about influencer, even with a company podcast,
Oh
the
yeah.
consistency part will kill you. Every week you're on until you're on hiatus, and you'll probably have some stuff going on. If you guys just watch Angelique and how she does this Lead Your Movement live, that's how you should do a podcast. Consistent every week, new subjects that are going to solve a problem, are going to tell a story that can help you move forward. Think about your listener. If you start with that, then you're good.
I think that consistency message is so important. I mean, before we launched our first episode, and Vince, our producer,
Mm-hmm.
who's listening right now, we had all of our processes laid out of what we were going to do. We spent so
Yeah.
much time laying that out on the back end. What we didn't do a lot of was me practicing on camera. We were like, we're just going to fly and I'm going to figure it out. And honestly, that was the thing I was most worried about was, I'm actually not someone who enjoys being on camera. I've gotten comfortable with it because I've done it so much, but it wasn't ever
Mm-hmm.
something that I was like, "Oh, I have to be on camera." I'm not really.
Right.
Um,
Right.
we spent so much time behind the scenes, Vernon, really getting organized. So when the show is over today, you'll get an email within the hour from our producer with all the links of where the show's been posted, all the posts. This is what you need to reshare it, what you can do with it, all the
Mm-hmm.
permissions to do it. And just because we have live video feed, it's really, we built it all off of best practices for podcasting.
Yeah.
The thing that you said to me that is one of the biggest writer downers is market more than you record. Because I do think that
Yes.
people get kind of caught up in the sort of baby of producing it, and then it's like a tree falls in the forest, but nobody was there to hear it. If
Hmm.
you're not, so we hit every channel, email,
Yeah.
YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. I mean, we're like everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And I think, can I just add one thing to that, which is repurpose,
Absolutely.
just to
I was
repurpose.
going there. Yeah, I was gonna go there. So let me tell you this one, because this one's one that nobody's doing right now, and it's an opportunity that's not going to last long. But Pinterest,
Mm,
surprisingly enough, Pinterest. So they redid their story pins, is what they were calling it. They just renamed it to something else that the community is kind of up in arms about. But they're giving preference to video right now, and it's just like an Instagram story, except for it lasts forever. So you do this story, you repurpose some video content or repurpose audio content with some video with it, upload it to Pinterest stories. You'll see it when you log into Pinterest, update the app. They're giving preference to that video right now. I uploaded an old video that was just like some promotional something or another. It was 15 seconds. It 900 views on a Pinterest account overnight that I had not used in forever. I use Pinterest for yard work ideas, but I uploaded this video. There's only like 170 people following me on Pinterest, and it
wow.
had 900 views and like 35 interactions and 4 or 5 pin saves. So someone saw it, thought it was good enough to save to go back and view it later. So it's definitely some place to look for promoting your podcast and just getting a little bit more awareness, because that's the thing you want to do. You're creating awareness so that people can actually come back and listen to your show. And so, yeah, you got to do that on all the channels.
I think that's brilliant. The other thing that's happening, and Tammy, I agree with you. Tammy's like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. I know this is, look, I've got my notes. You see me writing notes. I'm looking down because I'm writing notes. And then I know I've got a great guest on, Vernon, because when I'm like, okay, I'm writing notes and I'm sort of in this space and I feel like I hear everything, that there's some gold here. The other thing that I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Mhm.
Um, so there are people in Clubhouse right now who are recording things and then playing them into Clubhouse. I don't know yet. I'm still on the fence of how I feel about that, because I think the great thing about Clubhouse is the conversation. But what I'm finding people doing is they kind of kick off with a recording and then
Yeah.
they open up to conversation. I'm curious, what are your predictions for the marriage of podcasting and Clubhouse?
Yeah, I feel a little bit of a way about Clubhouse.
Hmm.
I like the platform because it reminds me of Anchor when Anchor first started.
Yeah.
Anchor used to be this live platform. It wasn't really podcasting at first, and it's great for that. I think live. I think it should stay live and organic, but people want to be able to use it like a podcast, and it's really just a broadcasting channel,
Yeah.
a lot like radio. That's what it reminds me of. It just reminds me of radio, where the DJ can bring in people, or you got your callers, and long time listener, first time caller.
I'm gonna start saying that on Clubhouse. I I am saying that on Clubhouse. I love
Right?
can I tell you
Yeah,
what can I tell you what it reminds me of? It's funny that you say that, because when I was explaining it to some of my family members, I said it reminds me of those like early 1990s party lines. Do you guys remember
that's
the
it.
party
I
lines?
remember the
Like
party line.
everybody would dial in and then people could
That's
like
all it
unmute
is.
themselves on the party line. So that's I feel like it's like the 2020s version of the 1990s party lines.
Everything old is new again.
Everything old is new again. Now I'm dating myself. Now I'm really dating myself that I was on party lines in the early 1990s. But
That's right.
so great.
1991 party line. But
Oh,
no,
yeah, do
Clubhouse is
the
good. I'm
I
not crazy
like
about
Clubhouse.
the recorded stuff coming
Yeah.
into Clubhouses. I think it's a little lazy. If you want to talk about something, talk about it. But
Mm,
nobody's
touche.
logging on and listen to a recording. You just send them to where the recording is in your email thing. Clubhouse is a little weird because people are trying to monetize it, and they're charging people to come in their clubhouses and stuff like that. I'm like, that's interesting, because depending on the reach, I'm not sure the real value exchange there. So I struggle a little bit with what's happening with the platform.
Mhm.
But I think it's a good platform. Anywhere you get attention, it's great. And right now, the attention is on Clubhouse. So by all means, leverage Clubhouse. If you're going to be a podcaster, talk about the stuff that you're going to talk about on your podcast,
That's good.
or drive people to the podcast in your Clubhouse by saying, oh, by the way, we were talking about this week on the podcast, and here's some stuff we didn't get into, but you guys should definitely tune in the podcast to find out what we did get into. So don't share the podcast, don't play the podcast on Clubhouse. Encourage people to go over to the podcast, because that's really where you can start to capture that audience. So yeah,
I
stuff like
think
that.
that's brilliant. I really like that sort of multi-channel touch point with the market.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that, on a podcast, it's more of the conversation between the guest and the host. But on Clubhouse, you can really kind of open it up. And that's one of the models we're
Yeah.
actually toying with for the fall is, would
Yeah.
we want to continue this conversation that we're having now, within a few days on Clubhouse, where folks could actually now come and talk to the guests and ask questions directly and have
Yep.
that back and forth. And so we're kind of playing with the sort of the marriage of the two. But I love what you're hitting on. I agree with you. I don't really want to come to Clubhouse to listen to a recording either, but I do
Mm-hmm.
like the cross pollination and the multi-channel touch points. That I'm super super stoked about. What
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, I've told people that if you're going to do Clubhouse, think about how Clubhouse really got popular. It was celebrities were dropping into rooms and coming in, and people were having direct access to them. So if you're going to if you're a podcaster and you're going to do that, see if you can arrange to get your guests, like you were saying, to come onto your Clubhouse and let people know, hey, I know you guys listen to the podcast, but catch this person live. And we're going to get into even more an after show type thing, like you see, all the television programs doing, where, log on to our, live, and you can watch us there. Use Clubhouse like that if you're going to, try to bring in podcasts in the Clubhouse.
I think that's brilliant, 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 brilliant. What did I not ask you? I know we're running out of time because I could talk to you for 2 hours. Maybe I will bring you. We are starting a clubhouse clubhouse club.
Mhm.
But we have a bigger announcement coming first. So I can't do that until we get through this other big announcement that's coming. But I do want to have you on. What did I not ask you today that I should have asked you today?
Oh my. So not much, because I mean, so much about the platform that we actually we covered quite a bit. There was something I was thinking about as far as podcasters and monetization, because it always comes up, and I'm glad you didn't bring it up, but I do want to bring it up because you have some people in your audience that are starting podcasts, and they're thinking about starting podcasts. And it doesn't come up in organizations so much, but it does come up with influencers and people that want to start a podcast. It's like, well, how do I make this make money? How do I monetize a podcast? And all the information out there will tell you, oh, well, get some affiliates and get some sponsorship, and you're just starting your podcast. And I don't care how good you are. Most of the time, you're going to have about 600 or so people after the end of a couple months. I mean, you can really push and do some marketing and put some budget behind it to really drive traffic. But you're not going to get that many people. So thinking that you're going to use your download numbers to monetize your podcast, it's going to be a while. So instead of doing that, think about your industry, who your industry serves, and approach the companies that serve that industry about being a partner on your show. That's an easy way to start when you're very first starting out, before you have one listener. If you approach a business that complements the thing that you're doing and say, hey, I'm going to be doing this, I'm going to give you a 3-month run on the podcast to be the very first advertising partner that we have come in, and we'll share some stories about your stuff. We'll have some links to your stuff on our website, stuff like that. And it's only $2,000 a month to come in and do this. Stuff like that, instead of, I'll get $15 per 1,000 downloads, is a lot better than trying to do a cost per click or CPM or CPA advertising based on radio, or trying to get some, ad platform to serve up your podcast. Direct deals with companies that complement the message that you have is the best way to immediately monetize a podcast. Just approach them with an advertising deal. You may be able to get an association if you have a podcast that, get this, if your podcast is like HR related and it's going out, and you're talking HR professionals, why not talk to a company like ATD,
Wow.
who has an upcoming conference, and say, hey, ATD, would you like to advertise on our conference? We'll run your ad, we'll do this, we'll interview one of your experts, and we'll charge you a flat fee, and we'll run this for whatever. Now, there's some danger in putting in, a baked in ad in a podcast that's going to live forever. There's some things that you could do to some technology you can use to put it in the pre-roll or post-roll. You can get complicated like that, or you can just record it into the show. Either one works, but thinking outside the box as far as podcast monetization and advertising, with approaching people that would want that exposure because they know, okay, you don't have an audience, but you're going to be marketing it, and tell them, hey, we're putting an ad budget towards this, and so we're going to promote each episode. We estimate that we're going to have 1,000 listeners the first month, and we can track that with this, and we can track that with email, and you can track it with a page that you give us. There's so many ways to do it that I get into influencers with, to think differently versus I've got to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads and get, $15 to $20 per 1,000 downloads. And, now I'm in the money. Yeah. If you're Joe Rogan or some other big, podcaster, but if you're just some person that's starting a podcast, it's better to think local, think companies that complement the thing that I'm doing and the message that I have that serves a very particular audience is the way to monetize a podcast for smaller brands. Because like you said, Snoop Dogg has a podcast, Leah Dunham has a podcast. You don't have that reach, and you probably never will. So take advantage of the reach that you have by going to companies that you don't hear on podcasts. So, don't approach some mattress company thinking that you're going to negotiate the next big deal with them, because you're probably not. And don't try to give away a free subscription on Audible, but maybe you do advertise a bookstore that has a national chain that doesn't advertise on podcast, stuff like that. Or like I said, conferences that are coming up that want to advertise that, hey, we're doing an event now, and like ATD conference, there are a lot of people in this audience that are probably going to go to ATD conference or tune in virtual or online learning conference, and other organizations and folks that have conferences like that, where podcasting would really serve them well if you deal with those audiences. So yeah, that's probably the one thing that I wanted to get into that we didn't get a chance to
I think
immediately
that's
get into.
brilliant. One of the things I love it. I love that advice, and I think that's, we've always said for 10 plus years prior to even starting the corporate agent, that you've got to look at, are you backing up a big tanker truck to fill in your goal? Are you trying to get there one teaspoon at a time? And if you're thinking about from the download perspective, that's a
Right.
teaspoon at a time, or you can have a
Yeah.
big tanker
Yeah.
truck.
Yeah.
The other way too, I think, is the indirect monetization, right? Because in the indirect
Right.
monetization, we have clients, you're in our membership community. We have all sorts of experts in our membership community. And for a lot of those folks, they use their podcast when they're speaking at a conference. We have them use their podcast, and you've heard me talk about this strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Go to all the other speakers, get all the speakers from the conference that you're speaking at to come on your podcast. Start sharing the podcast, all of you sharing those episodes, because now you're getting visibility prior to the
Yeah.
conference, right? With
Yeah.
your various
Absolutely.
audience. And we've had folks do it so effectively that when they go back to the the association that's hosting the big industry conference and say, we just had these 12 speakers from your conference on, they want to then share those episodes with their
That's right.
whole marketing list, because you just did marketing for them. And
That's right.
we've had folks before even conferences get going, get clients from that speaking opportunity. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's ways to monetize your podcast without worrying about downloads,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So I think that's amazing. How can folks, obviously, this is a conversation. We're definitely going to get you into our clubhouse room for sure. In the meantime, how do organizations get in touch with you? How do influencers get in touch with you?
All right, cool. So you can reach me pretty much anywhere online at Ross PR, or VernonRoss.com is my main website. That's where I do, my speaking stuff like that. And enterprisepodcaster.com is where you'll find all of the like corporate podcasting information, a lot of the courses that I do, Some of the stuff that I do, the free trainings and stuff like that, they'll be over on enterprisepodcaster.com. So definitely check that out. But if you go to vernonross.com, you'll be able to find it. And the page that I was going to tell you guys about, I killed last night. So too bad. Never edit a page the night before you have something.
That's right. That I would so do something like that. My team would want to strangle me. That has Angelique written all over it, Vernon. But VernonRoss.com, EnterprisePodcaster.com are two
Absolutely.
fantastic sites to go to. Plus, connect to Vernon. He's on LinkedIn. He was engaging with me this morning on LinkedIn. We had a packed house today. You guys were amazing. Thank you for being a part of this amazing conversation with all of us. Vernon, you are just such a rock star. I can't wait to have an opportunity where I get to work with you more. And we so love having you in our community. But I think you and I can have some fun over on Clubhouse too. So we'll get you over
Oh
there
yeah,
as soon as we
absolutely.
can.
Yeah, it will be a blast, I'm sure.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, you guys, what a great episode today. This totally just made me smile ear to ear. This topic, I could talk about this all day. We'll be back next week with our final episode of this season. I'm going to start using Vernon's language. I'm going to implement like that. So I'm going to start saying this was the end of our first season, which is true. We're taking our summer break. We'll be back in the fall, just like John Oliver. Now I'm starting to feel like John Oliver on HBO for those of you who love his show over there. So we'll be back with the fall with a new season. I love that. But do not miss Jose Hernandez next Wednesday. I'm telling you, it is going to blow your mind. Okay. So be here 1:00 next Wednesday. I will see you there. Have a great afternoon.